This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always was, always will be.
Tanse, hello. My name is Shayla Stonechild, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Every week on the show, I share stories of Indigenous women from Turtle Island and beyond to challenge the mainstream narrative around Indigenous identity and offer up a new category of role models so that the next generations may thrive. We'll put a spotlight on issues facing Indigenous women and explore how we can reclaim our voice, our body, and our spirit and our power that have been silenced and stolen throughout history and humanity. I'm super excited to introduce my guest in this episode. Her name is Cheyenne Leskanic, and she is of Mvskoke, Italian, and Scottish ancestry, and she is the founder of 3 Medicines, Longhouse, and 3 Medicines Birth. With a little over a decade of experience as a yoga teacher and as many years of recovery from substance addiction behind her, Cheyenne has made it her purpose to live in integrity and to create places of connection for all people. Drawing on her own experience, she is also a drug and alcohol abuse counselor who has brought wellness programs into schools, halfway houses, rehab centers, and studios. Cheyenne is also focused on honoring her Mvskoke heritage and works to protect tribal sovereignty while also integrating intersectional partnerships with all our relations on this land. Finally, she is a mom of 4 and a wife. We literally spoke about all of it, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. So hi, welcome to the podcast, Cheyenne. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Shayla. I'm so glad I am here.
And if you want to just introduce yourself, like the traditional territory, where you come from, if there was something that wasn't mentioned in that intro, it's your invitation.
That was a really big intro, but I am on Haudenosaunee and Lenape lands of Western PA. My traditional homelands are the Southeast. All the Mvskoke homelands were relocated to Oklahoma, so that is where my nation currently resides. But I am over here in Western PA. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
Have you always lived there, or where did you grow up?
So I did not always live here. My family has lived here for a very long time. My mother's side of the family has been here for quite some time. I grew up in Southern Ohio, but I actually just moved here 5 years ago from South Lake Tahoe, California. So I spent a lot of time out west in Arizona. I lived in Arizona for 3 years. I lived in Idaho, New Mexico, and then California until I moved back here after my first child was born.
And so growing up, what was that experience like for you growing up? For me, I grew up in Canada, so I have no idea what it's like even living in the States and also having Indigenous ancestry and also being mixed. So like, what was your experience growing up?
My experience growing up was really rough because I felt as an Indigenous person who lived in Southern Ohio too. Southern Ohio is it's just filled with white people, and that's all I had. But it's not even like mixed white people, like blonde-haired, blue-eyed white people everywhere. And it was just a very different experience living there. I felt like I was in a society that I couldn't fit into, and not only that, but like my school's names were names of racists. Like I went to General Sherman, and General Sherman is known to he had a big quote about he wanted to be removing the Indians, that's what he was famous for. And it's like, that's where I went to school. So it was like I was in a place where I didn't fit in, and I felt disconnected from the society at large, like that I was in, and then also disconnected from my own homelands too. So it was like a very lonely experience.
And so what has your journey been like, reconnecting to your Indigenous roots? Did that happen, or was that like later on in life?
So what is great is my father was always, he always wanted me to be connected to my roots, to my heritage, to my community, to my nation. And so I always was left with that responsibility of like what it means to be, Creek or Mvskoke. And, so at least my grandma, she made it so that I had regalia and I had other things that at least like was mine. I never learned how to jingle or to, do anything like that. I had stuff that was sacred to me, and that was passed to me that felt nice. And, so reclaiming has been probably when I got sober, I started getting deeply into my community because I needed to in order to stay sober, and find wholeness within myself.
And so when did you actually officially like walk the red road, if that's what you call it, or when you decided to become sober? When did that happen, and why did that shift happen?
So it was a really big downpour, was my childhood and was my usage and addiction throughout using. And I was left in a very, very hopeless place. Like I kind of said, like I felt lonely, right? So I was this person who was really lonely. I was really disconnected, and I didn't want to be disconnected from everyone. I didn't want to feel like an alien. I didn't want these things. I wanted to be connected, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So honestly, I kind of gave up on life for a while. And in doing that, I just, put all of everything on my body and all of these drugs and just did it for quite some time. And I was really grateful, actually. My personal story is that I was intervened and, I was arrested, actually. That was my changing point. And they were like, you can maybe have a chance this time. And I mean, this wasn't my first time being arrested. I actually, I spent time in therapy. I spent time in psych wards before when I was younger. Like my parents didn't know what to help me with. And then finally this big chance, it just, it hit me that I could do something different. So I was actually 17 and I've been sober ever since. So it was about almost 12 years ago. And it was a very long and hard process, but it was one that I'm very grateful for, obviously. I mean, it's awesome. So
yeah, I respect your journey, and also like how you're just so vocal kind of about it on social media. I feel like a lot of the shame and the stigma around drug and alcohol abuse is usually sometimes dealt alone. Like I don't see a lot of people really voicing it. And I think that's also where the maybe the stigma comes from, is not having these conversations. And so what would your advice be for, maybe someone in the younger generation, or not even the younger generation, but someone who's looking to maybe shift their life to lead a more sober life?
My biggest advice is probably just knowing that you can change your story anytime. And I think that's what held me back for so long, is I didn't know that I had that capability. And we really do. And, if at any time it just feels too heavy and too big, we can do something differently, and we're allowed, and we can honor that choice of ours. And, the red road and the sober road and the way of life. And, I was taught that, of course, like it is our natural way of being, getting back to the creator and getting back to, a community, getting back to all of that. But it's okay if we're not there, and it's okay if we seem lost and like we don't know how to get there. But just give yourself permission to know that you can, and it's always available for you. And it's hard to do something different also. I will say that. It is so hard to do something different and to be sometimes the odd one out, and find people who understand that and allow your shame of that to go away too.
I think that is a really important thing to touch on, is like sobriety can often feel, very isolating, because it is very normalized in Western society, and even surrounding us, advertising, social media. So it can feel like really isolating. And also I like my family has its own history with, addiction and drug and alcohol abuse. And for me, I never really knew where to look for help because I feel like the healthcare system within Canada is also pretty racist. And so I don't trust the healthcare system. And I know my dad didn't trust it and even my siblings. And so did you find the support you needed through the healthcare system, or what did that look like?
So no, and that's actually a big part of my story is like, well, when I think of like healthcare system, like I was sent to therapy at a young age, and I mean because I had overdosed many times, and and they would be sending me to therapy and psych wards and like all of these things, and I every time I felt judged, I felt disconnected from these people. They didn't know, they didn't understand me, and they didn't. And it wasn't until I found some people who actually understood who I was. And they happened to be, I had only 2 Indigenous influences at the time. But at least I found people who also were sober. Like it was for me, I found it in the rooms of, AA, which is, out there. But there is also, Indigenous groups of AA, which is hard to find, but they do exist. And there's something called Wellbriety, actually, and it's made by an Indigenous founder. And, he's actually turned the steps into like a medicine wheel. And it's this not judgy Western, medicine type. I don't think that can help us to the extent that we need because it's not culturally safe for us. But there are things, I had to find something outside to find something culturally safe for me.
There's a conference that I was just a part of, and these Indigenous doctors were actually talking about this concept of two-eyed seeing, of bringing in the Western healing and also having the Indigenous ways, and to really find more people that know that two-eyed seeing exists. And so I know you now do a lot of work within the wellness industry. And so what has that shift been like for you to now teach others, how to balance their own like mind, body, spirit? Like how has that shift been for you from having your own addiction to now teaching people about a healthy way of living?
For me, the biggest shift is I teach what I would have wanted to be taught, right? And that's kind of what I go for. So when I'm working with people, and because I was taught yoga and healthy way of living when I started, in recovery, and it really helped me gain a sense of groundedness, gain a sense of reassurance, gain a sense of confidence. And when I started going out and working in the wellness community, it was not a safe place for me because of the whitewashing and just people and attitudes. And it was just not a safe place. So, and I think it has its purpose, but not for me and not for a lot of people like me. So now that I am teaching, and I've been teaching in these ways and in these rooms, I just take it from experience of what I know helped me and what didn't help people like me. So it's wonderful because I get to bring that experience of just releasing all of the shame that I can, right? Because I think that's the biggest shame. I never want to bring more shame into these spaces. And I felt like for me personally, that's what was coming into these spaces with me, was more shame when I would go into the normal Western world of wellness. And so now I'm so grateful that I just get to release as much as possible when I'm with people.
I think that's a good point to bring up because that was a lot of the resistance I had to going into yoga teacher training. And I was taught by white instructors and white mentors. And so have you been able to connect with other Indigenous yoga instructors or other Indigenous wellness facilitators? And yeah, like what has that for me? I feel like I'm always taking up space in like colonial places. And so it's hard sometimes to find other Indigenous yoga instructors and wellness people. And so, yeah, have you even had a chance to connect with other Indigenous yoga instructors?
What's really great is I have, which has been wonderful, and not too many because they're just, we are spread out as people. But what's been great about the last, I would say 2 years is I have found an amazing community of not just Indigenous people, but I'm really connected with a lot of South Asians, which has in the yoga community, has just expanded my own everything. It just expanded, how I really show up for them in yoga too. and their rooms, because like I've learned a lot about what it means to be an accomplice with them, and what it means to be practicing this with them and with me, and just a whole mixture. So I'm really grateful for what I've been able to find in just the entire community that's really dedicated to a different kind of wellness.
And where did you take your yoga teacher training?
So I took my yoga teacher training in a place that's now closed down in Arizona. It was over 10 years ago, I think, that I did it. But I have practiced in the Ashtanga method. So all of my teachers are Ashtanga teachers. All of them have studied from in Mysore, India. And so that's kind of like the lineage that I've been practicing, and all of the teachers that I followed. I continuously work with them also. So even though, I did my teacher training, and I work with a number of different teachers since then, and it's nice to catch up and continue to be under their influence, because it's always just a learning experience for me still.
Yeah, I feel like yoga is something you could always be learning, and like you could never not learn something new from yoga itself. Do you have like tools that you use on like daily rituals that keep you centered, like your yoga practice, or what helps you when you're feeling overwhelmed come back to reclaiming your own power?
So because for me, I also have a lot of children in my home. So it's really hard to have dedicated time and space for me on a regular basis. But I try to what's called live a kind of a prayerful way, right? So living in a prayerful way helps me continue my yoga and my meditation every day. So I know that I try to say, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my senses meditation in the morning. And it's usually while I'm drinking coffee. Maybe I've got the kids settled and I can do some meditation in the morning that's based on senses. And that helps me because, it doesn't take some time, but I really just settle myself down with, focusing on what I can touch, what I can taste, what I can feel, what I can hear. And as I do that, I usually can find like a nice and settled place. I do try to do physical asana as much as possible, but I'm really into breath work because it also helps my kids. So bringing them in with me, and there's not a day that a toddler doesn't freak out and we get do breath work. So, having that as a regular experience with me in the day is really nice. But also just reclaiming my power is a lot about helping other people too. So every day that I am able to help others and connect with other people, and I feel like I gain more from that than they probably do.
So kind of going back, you said you went to therapy, but like what do you think would need to change within the way people deal with addiction? Like how can we support people, I guess, is the right way. How can we support people that we know may be struggling with addiction, or even if it's ourselves?
My biggest thing about being able to support, but the root causes of addiction are usually, there's lots of them. There's, your generational trauma. There's, your genes. There's what you experienced as a kid. And looking at all those roots, a lot of the time it is this disconnection though. And we'll find that this disconnection spiritually, or this disconnection emotionally. And if the thing is if we are struggling ourselves, the biggest thing is knowing that there is hope, and you really have to touch that hope of there's another way to feel, because that's what it was with me. I promised other people I wouldn't feel any different than I was, because it was so painful and so lonely and so filled with anger and frustration. And I didn't believe people until I saw them, and they said, I promise I felt the way you did, and I promise we can feel a different way. And then if you do and you love people who are struggling, the best thing that we can do is also encourage that there is probably another way, but also don't shame them out of what is happening, right? Because we don't want to contribute to that too. Don't enable them, right? We don't want to, enable and oh, it's okay that you're always, but we want to be able to not shame them over it. So I think that big balance of, well, don't enable, but also don't make them, shameful experience of it. And because this is something that millions of people suffer with, right?
Yeah.
And it's a big deal. And people are dying because of it. And we don't need to have that shame attached to it. We need to be able to talk and love these people and let them know there can be a different way.
That's the next thing I wanted to touch on is I feel like 2020 was a real big awakening for everyone, and not in the best way. We lost a lot of people because of COVID, but also because of, overdoses and drugs and alcohol. I believe that here in Vancouver, actually, we've lost more people to overdoses than we have the actual virus. And so I guess for me, I'm always like curious to know if there's signs that we should look out for. Like, how do we know someone may be struggling? For me, I don't know. I don't know unless someone tells me, but I also realize some people don't want to tell that part of themselves as well.
I think the biggest thing is, it's so hard because people are good at hiding these things, right? I mean, like we live in this life where we feel like we have to hide these big, huge problems and these things about ourselves. And because it is shame, because it's criminalized, right? Addiction and drugs are criminalized. So we have to hide it when it comes to, a state level. And then when it comes to a personal level, it's just really hard to open up. But like, hey, I'm using cocaine, who did, on a regular basis that you don't know of. Maybe we're doing it as friends, but like I'm also doing it, every single day and whatever towards it. And I think like the biggest thing about looking for signs is really just if you've noticed that, someone that you love and care about is not in a safe place emotionally, then that's where I would look for showing connection for them, right? And showing, up for them in that way. But also if someone is not willing to share, there's no way we can do it, And what helped me personally is, my own grandmother, she was always willing to tell me about her sister who was a pill popping, 80-year-old and died of it, and my grandfather was an alcoholic and everyone spoke about these people, not in a shameful way, but in a way of, okay, this is what it was. And it was what it was. Right. And I think that, that helped me accept what I was and what I was doing because it removed a little bit of the shame and made it a normal conversation. And I think that the more we make a normal conversation out of these things, the more that we have the ability to help people.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, even me, I had my own issues with substance abuse when I was younger. And it was something that I never wanted to share because I thought, if I want to be in a position of power, then I have to portray this certain image. But that's not based in like authenticity or coming from a place of honesty. So it's really like, I guess, getting honest with yourself and bringing awareness to, even knowing your toxic cycles. For me, I feel like I have to, like, I know my habits. And then once I do something that goes me back into like my past self, I guess you can say, then it's kind of like a wake up call. And so that's kind of the reason why I wanted to focus more on Indigenous representation within wellness. I think a lot of the wellness industry, well, even for Indigenous people, we never really had those role models. Like you said, you knew like 2 Indigenous influencers like back in the day. So why do you think it's so important that, if you do, of why we have authentic Indigenous representation?
Because it means that we can open up, right? I mean, for me, it means if I see someone who is an authentically Indigenous person who is authentically showing up in the ways that I might not think I can, then I'm going to, right? For me, one of those big, huge things was seeing an Indigenous sober person and hearing their words. And then knowing, well, if that person can do it, then maybe I can, because we have to be able to see these things in these people. And it's so important because we cannot all relate to each other in every way.
Yeah.
But, and it can feel lonely when you don't feel like you have anybody like you who feels like you do. And then who can get in these places that are, you see as beautiful, and so seeing people who might have felt like me and are now in these positions that are awesome, that's good for everyone, right? The more that we have the ability to connect with somebody on that level and look up to them because they might be like you, the better that is for everyone.
what would your advice be to like the younger generation that may want to do the work that you're doing now and, start helping other people and to model, sobriety? What would your advice be to the younger generation?
That they're just amazing for living and existing, and and that they also, once again, can change their story at any time and become whoever they want to be at any given time. And they hold the ultimate sovereignty of their knowledge, and they should always hold on to that and understand that and express that in the ways that feel the best to them, and that they have the ability to do anything. And there is always hope, even if it feels like there's just really not. They're always, even if you feel so, unique and, in this place of, well, it's not going to work for me. It can. It absolutely can. For you, for everyone, it can.
Do you have people that you look up to now or that you are inspired by currently?
I do. I have a lot of different people right now that are just like doing amazing things and using their voice and their authenticity and continuously to move towards a better and a greater society and earth.
And like the focus of this podcast really is to bring more awareness to these role models, these Indigenous women, matriarchs. The word matriarch, I think, means something different for everyone. What does the word matriarch mean to you?
So, the dictionary definition is, a woman who in the family is a strong leader. And for me, I take it as like an entire historically based, in my Indigenous community, matriarchs, women were integral parts of society everywhere, right? We were integral parts of community. We were integral parts of the family. For me, matriarch, I think of a woman reclaiming that integral part of community, because that's what she is, and that's what matriarchs are. That's what women are. We are supposed to be integral parts of each and every space of community. That's what I think of when I think of matriarch.
I think it also resonates with a lot of work that you do too, because you said not only are you a yoga instructor, but I believe you also work with mothers. And are you a doula?
I am. No. Yes, I'm a birth worker.
Oh, you are. Yeah. Okay. I thought
yes.
so.
Yes.
So that I feel like is also almost reclaiming, because I just realized this, I hosted the Indigenous Doulas Conference, and I didn't even know the word doula was like a colonial way of speak. Like they were using, what were they called? They were saying aunties to like decolonize the word of doula. Do you relate to doula, or would you say it something completely else?
So I've always called myself a birth worker because so it's just always been birth worker, because I feel like even though that doesn't even properly, encapsulate everything that goes into working with women in birth, because it's not just birth, you're working with women in a ceremony, which is what birth is, right? And so I haven't found a perfect word to say that, but it's birth worker. And that's what I love doing that. It's an amazing part of my life.
And what made you want to be a birth worker?
Before I gave birth to my second child was when I decided to really start helping mothers. And it was because of my traumatic experience with my first, but also my, once again, non-Indigenous role mothers, non-Indigenous role models who are mothers. Because there weren't very many out there that I was around and that I could connect to. And obviously in the media, there wasn't any. But I always felt like, this colonial way of mothering doesn't fit me. And it was actually like a really hard experience learning to trust myself as a mother. And so as I went in, and I had a very long, 5-year break in between my first and my second kid. And when I went with there, I started working with the local midwife center and, about uncolonizing parenthood and instinctual parenthood and changing the way, we work for women and we work as mothers, and really reclaiming that instinctual identity that I was shamed for as a new mother, for, listening to what my own things were. So it was just really, it felt like a responsibility to bring that back to all of us.
What would your advice be to, non-Indigenous people that maybe do want to decolonize, how they perceive the world, whether it be through motherhood or, being a birth worker, or what would your advice be to non-Indigenous people when it comes to just even really it could be anything.
Yeah. My biggest thing, and I'm working on like this workshop right now, and it's really fun because I'm trying to I'm actually honing in on what I want non-Indigenous people to know. And it's like, what I want non-Indigenous people to know is I want us to all take responsibility. I want us all to leave the guilt that we have, because it's not serving anybody. And I want us to move forth in responsibility and love for each other, right? And a lot of that looks like big respect, right? And a lot of that looks like I want people to know what territory they live on, and that it's an illegal occupation probably because none of the treaties were followed and they've all been broken. And then that's our responsibility, not your fault, but our responsibility, And I want people to know that, we need you decolonizing or uncolonizing, right? We need, non-Indigenous people to do this. We want to work with, I want to work with you, and I want to, be in this, but we have to do it with respect and responsibility to the world around us, with just unparalleled love instead of fear, and love instead of ownership, and love instead of, just ownership and instead of ownership.
Yeah, accountability and like taking the time to understand the history of which territory you're living on, even the territory from where you come from. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of like language and vocabulary that is thrown around on social media, and I feel like sometimes it can water down the sense. And so, do you? What would your definition of decolonization actually be?
So I believe that decolonization is in fact of the land, right? So I believe that it means that we no longer colonize the land, which means we return it to Indigenous people. That's what I believe colonizing means. But when I think of it in the metaphorical sense, and not metaphorical sense, but when I think of it when it applies to things that are not on the land, I think of it more of an uncolonizing, and in this uncolonizing, I think of it as detangling the roots of colonization, which are capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy, and we have to remove those from the roots of the real things. And once you can take away the capitalism, the patriarchy, and the white supremacy of the roots, then you're uncolonizing it. Yeah,
I think there's there's like a lot of talk. I don't know if it's relatable to the state. I feel like the States, honestly, is like a few steps back when it I know there's a lot of like racism that happens here, and like our whole system is also like super not supportive of Indigenous people. There's the Truth and Reconciliation Act, and I feel like they put more money into working against the TRC than they actually do to committing actual reconciliation to Indigenous peoples here. And so what do you think is one actionable step that people can take in their daily, on a daily basis to do, to decolonize white supremacy and capitalism? What is one daily action?
Well, I'm all about that action. I love that action word, right? And I think that people have to first identify what they're looking for, right? What are they looking for by uncolonizing? Do they want to decolonize the land? Are they hoping to help give back the land to Indigenous people? Then they probably have to know and take action to getting involved with Indigenous people, right? That would be your first action step if that's what you want to do, and you want to do that for the land. Also, you have to learn about the land, protecting the land, right? You have to gain a responsibility for the land. And I think changing that relationship, I think that's where you maybe start. Change your relationship, learn about your Indigenous community around you, and then learn about the land, because that's, what's happening here. That's what we're all trying to protect. That's what we all need back. We need so really starting to learn about that is an actionable step that we can do.
Yeah, there was this one book that I was reading. It's called Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell. I don't know if you've read it or
I
not
have,
yet.
actually.
Yeah, and she talks about even how language, like the way that Indigenous people, some native languages, we speak through a sense of kinship to the land and the water and the earth and the sky, each other. Like you literally can't fragment the word from its meaning. And so I feel like even the English language, the colonial language, is so fragmented from, if you think the land as separate than you, then you can do harm to the land. And so it's coming back to that relationship-based approach. Moving forward, there's this theme of Indigenous futurism. And so what does Indigenous futurism mean to you, if anything?
So when I think of Indigenous futurism, I think of course, I would love to see the future as Indigenous, right? Yes, of course. I want the future to be based in kinship loving communal communities, right? I want us to have a land-based relationship with everyone and each other. I want us to return to that. For me, it means that we have to, once again, I think it's everyone's responsibility to uncolonize our roots, to wipe away what whiteness has taken from everyone and what it is doing to the land, what it's doing to everything at large, and re-indigenize the world and our relations. Our relations are pretty messed right now, and I think we have to uncolonize what those look like.
Where can people support the work that you're doing, whether it be on Instagram, online, any handles?
Cheyenne Leskanic is my Instagram handle. You can go ahead and support me on there. If you want to sign up for the website emails, I don't send very many, just like one a week. And you can sign up for those if you want. It's 3medicineslonghouse.com. And I would love to invite everyone into the space, my space.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Cheyenne, for taking the time out of your day to join me on the Matriarch Movement podcast. And I really look forward to seeing more of your work happen.
Thank you so much, Shayla. This has been wonderful.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at matriarch.movement. And don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.